Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to the dusty, bustling cities of ancient Mesopotamia, where the streets are sticky with who knows what. The air smells faintly of boiled onions and burnt offerings, and surprisingly, the locals are a little obsessed with their teeth. You're about to step into sandals you didn't ask for and walk through or maybe Lagash, where markets hum, oxen grumble, and somewhere, someone is definitely gnawing on a twig like it's completely normal. Spoiler alert, it is. You probably won't survive this. No toothbrush, no minty rinse, and absolutely no dental insurance. But don't worry, you'll blend right in. You got a little clay tablet in your satchel, some copper jewelry, and, if you're lucky, a small bundle of sweet-smelling twigs to keep your breath from making your neighbors faint. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're settling in, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the uneven streets of a city made mostly of sun-baked bricks. The alleys are narrow, the buildings squat, and the air hums with flies. You pass a vendor selling pickled fish from a wobbly cart and someone yelling about a new shipment of barley that definitely isn't new. The ground underfoot squelches faintly with each step, not exactly modern pavement. You try not to look too closely. What you do notice, though, are the teeth. People smile often in Mesopotamia, partly because it's polite, and partly because it shows off your status. A bright, relatively clean set of teeth? That means you've got access to imported herbs and the time to chew on twigs. Blackened or chipped teeth, on the other hand, might mark you as a laborer, someone who's been eating the really coarse barley bread. And everyone eats the bread. It's made from stone-ground grain, which, yes, often contains microscopic grit that slowly sands down your teeth like nature's own dental torture device. That's just life. You can try to avoid it, but you'll still end up crunching a little rock with your breakfast. As you wander deeper into the marketplace, you hear gossip and the clatter of baked clay bowls. A woman haggles over some river fish, while another sells sachets of dried mint and myrrh, both considered valuable not just for rituals, but for masking the breath of someone who's been fermenting onions in a clay jar all day. You stop at a small stall that sells bundles of thin, pale twigs tied with dried grass string. The vendor smiles, revealing a gap where a molar probably lived a few years ago. Chew one end until it's soft, he mumbles through the missing tooth. Then scrape like you mean it. These are miswax, or at least their ancient Mesopotamian ancestors. They come from the Salvadora persica tree, if you want to be botanical about it. Not native to the region, but definitely imported and prized by those who could afford it. For the average citizen, though, local reeds or even date palm branches had to do the job. Less minty, more planty. You buy a bundle and slide it into your satchel next to your little wax tablet for notes. As you turn the corner, a priest in a long wool robe raises a hand in blessing and mutters something that sounds like a prayer against tooth demons. Yes, those were a thing. And yes, people genuinely believe that if your tooth hurt, it was because a worm was living inside it. But we'll get to that delightful tidbit soon enough. The sun begins to dip low on the horizon, casting orange light against the mud brick walls and creating long shadows in the narrow streets. The smell of roasted onions gives way to incense as temple rituals begin. Somewhere, a lyre twangs out a slow melody, possibly a lullaby, or maybe just an ode to grain storage techniques. Honestly, it's hard to tell sometimes. You pause to watch a family sitting outside their home, eating dinner off a shared flatbread. The youngest child gnaws thoughtfully on a twig between bites. They've clearly been taught the basics of oral hygiene early, although whether that twig does much against sticky date syrup remains to be seen. Historians still argue whether tooth cleaning was ritual, medical, or mostly cosmetic. Maybe it was all three. After all, in a society where your appearance could be linked to divine favor, showing up to temple with dragon breath might not go over well with the gods. You lean against a warm stone wall, chew the end of your own twig, and begin to fray it into tiny fibers. It feels odd at first, but soon it softens and starts to mimic a very primitive brush. You gently rub it across your front teeth. It tastes faintly woody, a bit bitter, but not unpleasant. Not minty, of course. This isn't modern toothpaste, but there's a cleanish feel to it, like brushing with the forest itself. A nearby dog flops down in the dirt beside you, sighs, and falls asleep immediately. You kind of envy its simplicity. No worrying about cavities, no dodging temple taxes, no chewing sticks to impress your neighbors. A woman walks past holding a jar of honey and humming a tune about grain rations. You half smile, not wanting to flash too many of your own poorly brushed teeth. But here, that's normal. It's a land where everyone's doing their best, where a stick and a handful of crushed fennel seeds count as an oral hygiene routine. You look around once more at the flickering torches being lit, the faint murmur of prayers, the smell of clay and cumin hanging in the evening air. You're a little dusty, slightly hungry, but you've got your chewing stick and your teeth still in your head. In ancient Mesopotamia, that's a win. You wake to the gentle hum of early morning activity, the kind that starts before the sun fully rises, but after the goats have made enough noise to rouse the neighborhood. The air is cooler now, just barely crisp, before the clay walls of the city absorb another day's worth of heat. You stretch under your woven mat, brushing a bit of straw from your tunic, and take a moment to appreciate that your teeth, miraculously, aren't aching yet. The sounds of ancient Mesopotamia waking up are oddly soothing. Someone's pounding grain in a mortar not far off. A baby cries, then is shushed by the low lull of a reed flute. Water splashes into ceramic jars as neighbors fill up from a nearby canal. It's not quite peace and quiet, but it's a rhythm, a soft, shuffling harmony of daily life that cradles you into the day. And you, lucky you, have a morning routine. You reach for your bundle of twigs, carefully tied together with a strip of dried flax. The bundle is warm from sleeping beside your mat, and you pick one that's slightly more flexible. You chew the end with a practiced bite, softening the fibers until they fray out like a bristly fan. There's something vaguely meditative about it, like watching a candle flicker or the sound of soft rain, only with slightly more bark flavor. Once the bristles are soft, you begin brushing, not vigorously, not like some overzealous modern-day electric toothbrush. This is a slower, more deliberate motion, gentle scrubbing over each tooth, front and back, with pauses to spit into the dirt floor. You're careful to avoid the corner of the house where the clay walls show signs of last season's mold. Sacred or not, no one wants to brush next to mildew. A knock at the door. It's your neighbor, eyes still sleepy, but her hands already busy holding a tiny bowl of crushed herbs. "For breath," she says with a half smile, revealing a row of teeth that would make a modern dentist cry. Still, there's care in her ritual. She dabs a little paste, something gritty and green, onto the tip of her own twig and offers you some. You accept. It tastes zesty, like fennel, maybe, or old parsley. Possibly both. You step out together, making your way through the winding paths of the neighborhood. Around you, families are waking up, lighting small fires for morning bread, sweeping their thresholds with bundles of dried reeds. There's no coffee, but the smell of fresh flat bread almost makes up for it. Your neighbor nudges you and nods toward a man on the corner selling what looks like a ceramic box of powder. It's probably some sort of imported tooth cleaning mixture. Ash from fig trees, maybe, or pulverized oyster shells if he's really fancy. The man waves, trying to get your attention, and shouts, "Make your mouth a temple." It's a catchy slogan, if a little misleading. Historians still argue, your neighbor mutters dryly, whether powdered ostrich egg shells actually helped or just made your breath smell like breakfast. You both chuckle and move on. Past the clay ovens and bleating goats, you pass a small shrine. It's set into the corner of a house, nothing grand. Just a carved figure tucked in an alcove surrounded by wilted reeds and dried figs. People often leave offerings here before heading to the fields. You spot a few teeth resting at the base, real ones. Probably from children or maybe a not-so-great street healer who finally pulled one too many. And you remember, right, there's a tradition. When a tooth falls out, you offer it to Ninosina, goddess of healing, in the hopes she'll protect the rest. You silently make a note to avoid that sweet date jam today. Too sticky. Around a corner, someone singing softly, a lullaby maybe, or a hymn about river irrigation. It's surprisingly hard to tell in Mesopotamia. The language of daily life blends chores, prayers, and poetry into one mellow current. A potter sweeps the front of his workshop. "Careful," he says, pointing at a cracked tile. "Someone lost a tooth there last week." It's unclear whether he means tripping or chewing. Honestly, either is plausible. You pause for breakfast at a stall where a woman is serving warm barley cakes. You tear off a piece and chew slowly, always slowly. It's hot, slightly bitter, and yes, there's that familiar crunch of something not quite food. A sliver of grit from the millstone, almost guaranteed to file your molars down a micrometer or two. You wince, but smile through it. "Should have used river rocks instead of sandstone," she mutters, as if she's been telling the miller this for weeks. You wash it down with a sip of watered beer, the staple beverage of the day. Not enough alcohol to do damage, just enough to make sure your morning feels mellow. It doesn't help your breath, but it does wash away the last of the herbal paste. You pass a young boy standing with his mother outside the healer's house. He's holding his jaw, clearly in pain. The healer emerges, holding a twig not unlike yours but blackened at the tip. It's been burned, probably to disinfect it, or just to look official. "Worm," he mutters solemnly, and the mother nods as if this diagnosis was expected. You shake your head. That again, the infamous tooth worm. The idea that a literal worm burrows into your tooth and causes pain. It's a belief so widespread that it shows up on ancient tablets across civilizations. Not true, of course, but then again, they didn't have x-rays. They had divination and ash paste. Back in your courtyard, you rinse your twig in a clay bowl and hang it to dry. You pluck a fresh one and start again, because yes, this is your routine. Morning breath is a menace in any century. The sun is rising fully now, casting golden light over the rooftops. Somewhere, a priest begins chanting the morning rite. Birds flit through the narrow sky lanes between buildings. You sit, you chew, you scrape, and you think, maybe this isn't so different from modern life. Just replace your electric toothbrush with a branch and your toothpaste with ground herbs. And here you are, a little sore in the jaw, sure, possibly grinding down your enamel with ancient sand, but also strangely centered, ritual, repetition, care. And yes, mild gingivitis. You step back into the street with your twig still in hand, the end nicely fanned out from that second round of brushing. It's already starting to brown a bit from use, but that's normal. People around you are doing the same. Some chewing absent-mindedly while tending goats, others rubbing the fibers against their teeth with deliberate, almost ceremonial focus. Hygiene here is both habit and statement. You pass an older man sitting cross-legged in front of a basket stand, plucking the bark off a reed. He catches your eye and grins. His teeth are, well, they're mostly there. Some are worn flat, others darkened from years of chewing on things not meant to be chewed. He gestures at his twig with a little flair, saying something you don't quite catch, but seems to mean, this is the good stuff. And it might be, because in a world without floss, dental picks, or Listerine, the humble twig is your best friend. Not all twigs are created equal, of course. Some are from aromatic shrubs. If you're lucky, maybe Iraq wood or myrtle, even if those aren't native to your city. People trade them across regions, bundling up the best-smelling branches with dried herbs and shipping them down the Tigris. It's said the Sumerians favored a certain type of desert shrub that left a peppery aftertaste and, miraculously, didn't double as a goat snack. But most common folk stick with what's nearby. River reeds, date palm branches, or slim shoots from local fig trees. They're easy to fray and soft enough not to cause gum damage, unless you really go at it with the enthusiasm of a man scrubbing burnt lentils off a pot. As you keep walking, the city transitions from domestic murmur to full-blown morning bustle. Vendors shout about everything from sesame oil to fertility charms. You dodge a clay water jug, balanced precariously on a young woman's head, and step around a dog who refuses to move for anyone, not even priests. On a side alley, you spot someone doing something odd. A teenage boy is grinding a mix of powder with a bit of water on a flat slate stone. It's a messy process, and the smell is, how to put this, eye-watering. Curious, you step closer and peer over his shoulder. "Fish bones," he says, beaming with a pride that suggests he's just invented floss. Crushed and mixed with fennel, cleans better than twigs. He holds out the paste toward you, and you politely decline. The color alone is enough to make your gums retreat. Still, the idea isn't new. Some early sources, inscribed tablets, trade records, the occasional poetic medical verse, hint that people experimented with all kinds of substances to freshen their mouths. Crushed bones, salt, ash, dried flowers, even chalky sediment scraped from riverbeds, and not all of them were disasters. Some had mild antiseptic properties. Others just made your mouth feel like you licked the bottom of a burnt pot. Historians still argue whether these pastes were common practice or niche luxury. It's unclear whether your average barley farmer could afford to mash up imported fennel with Egyptian ash, or if this was just another temple trick passed down by ritual healers hoping to impress the gods or the nobles. A little further down the street, you pass a workshop where two women are preparing small wax cones, scented with myrrh, maybe a touch of cassia. They're meant to melt slowly on the head during formal banquets, releasing perfume as the evening wears on. One of them chews on a thin twig as she works, humming a tune about good husbands and clean teeth. You catch a lyric about teeth white as sunlit barley, which is either very poetic or slightly worrying, considering how yellow barley tends to be. Back at the canal, you rinse your mouth with a handful of river water. It's not exactly filtered, and you're vaguely aware that a goat just stepped in it, but it's tradition. Some believe the sacred river washes away illness, dental or otherwise. You give your mouth a good swish, spit onto the dirt path, and immediately regret that last sip. Slightly salty. Definitely goat-tinged. Two boys nearby are chewing on thick reeds, pretending to be warriors. They sword fight, the ends of their makeshift weapons splintering into fibrous brushes. One kid swings too wide and hits a ceramic jar, which topples dramatically and cracks open. Their mother yells something about wasting the fennel paste, and both scatter like lizards. You keep moving, now feeling the heat of the day pressing in from above. The buildings reflect the sun, the bricks hot to the touch. But you're still chewing, still brushing. The process is rhythmic, calming. In a way, it centers you, an ancient mindfulness exercise disguised as oral hygiene. A pair of temple assistants pass by, their robes freshly pressed, their mouths suspiciously minty. You wonder if they've dipped their twigs in a bit of imported gum resin. It's one of those rare luxuries brought in from beyond the Zagros Mountains. Expensive, highly prized, rumored to fix even the worst breath after a night of garlic stew. You wander toward a quieter quarter of the city where people are setting up for afternoon rest. A man pulls a reed curtain across his doorway, shielding his home from the dust that's starting to rise. You take a seat on a cool stone bench, your jaw slightly sore, but your breath noticeably less alarming than it was at sunrise. You glance at the frayed tip of your twig, soft, stained, but still useful. You could probably get another brushing out of it before switching. You tuck it behind your ear and lean back, listening to the lull of the canal water, the rustle of palm fronds, and the occasional grunt of someone trying to carry a basket of turnips that's definitely too heavy. All around you, Mesopotamia is alive with sound and scent and motion. And yes, somewhere in the background, always, the faint scrape of someone brushing their teeth with a branch. You close your eyes for just a moment, head tilted toward the sky, and let the warm air drift across your face. The taste of fennel still lingers, not unpleasant. You think, just briefly, that maybe, just maybe, this twig thing has its merits, at least until someone invents floss. You wake from your short nap to the sound of a donkey sneezing loudly, followed by someone muttering curses in Akkadian. You blink into the late morning light, now filtered through the lattice work of a rooftop shade. Your mouth is dry your teeth gritty from the dusty air, and it's time for a little mid-morning maintenance. You reach for your trusty twig. The end is a little too dry now, so you nip off the frayed part with your teeth, chew a fresh bit, and start the ritual again. Softening, fanning, scrubbing. At this point, your jaw might qualify as one of your most toned muscles. Who needs gym memberships when oral hygiene is a full-body experience? Today, you decide to try a new technique you overheard at the grain stall, using river mud to polish. Yes, it sounds dubious, and yes, it is dubious. But it's a thing, apparently. You take a pinch from the bowl, kept near your neighbor's canal pot. River silt that's been dried, ground, and lightly sifted to remove the occasional snail shell. You dab your twig into it and begin brushing. It's earthy, slightly chalky, definitely not refreshing, but oddly satisfying. You can almost imagine the fine grit smoothing out plaque like a miniature polishing stone. Some say it strengthens the enamel. Others say it just gives you a weird, muddy smile. Historians still argue whether river silt was genuinely effective or just another creative solution from people desperate for clean teeth and no idea what bacteria are. A priest passes by, nodding solemnly. His teeth are stained a pale gray, likely from years of chewing a different concoction involving burnt date pits. You nod back. It's a moment of mutual recognition. Your mouth is weird. His mouth is weird. And that's just life in Mesopotamia. You decide to visit the herbalist's corner next. She's an older woman with sharp eyes and fingers stained green from years of crushing leaves. Her stall is a chaotic blend of bundles and bowls, each with their own pungent story. You point to a little jar marked with a fish symbol, and she nods. Tooth freshener, she says, and hands you a small pinch. It smells like anise and something vaguely smoky. You sprinkle a bit on your brush twig and try again. The flavor is intense, like chewing incense, if incense were mildly spicy and full of questionable aftertastes. Still, your mouth feels awake, possibly alarmed, but definitely awake. The herbalist chuckles. Good for breath, bad for love, she says, winking. Apparently, not everyone appreciates smoky anise kisses. You keep brushing as you wander through the craft district, where potters shape clay with twine-wrapped fingers and weavers hang dyed cloth to dry. A few craftsmen chew twigs as they work, sometimes pausing to gnaw thoughtfully during difficult knots or awkward vase handles. It's become a kind of social behavior, like how modern folks fiddle with pens or sip from coffee cups. Here, a twig in your mouth says, I'm thoughtful. I'm trying not to develop abscesses. I'm doing my best. At the edge of the district, you spot a group of young students reciting poetry to their teacher, who sits with a long rod of palm bark between his teeth, chewing absently. The students take turns shouting cuneiform phrases and getting corrected, often dramatically. One boy drops his stylus and mutters something under his breath. His teacher responds by flicking his twig sharply at the ground, sending a puff of dust into the air. Disrespect and bad teeth? Not on his watch. By midday, the heat is oppressive. You find refuge under a low awning and sip lukewarm barley drink while fanning yourself with a slab of pressed reed mat. Your tongue runs over your teeth, still smooth. A little twig splinter caught between your molars, sure, but nothing that requires spiritual intervention, yet. Nearby, two older women are deep in conversation about tooth-related remedies. One insists that chewing roasted cumin seeds every night will prevent toothaches. The other swears by rinsing with cooled onion water, which frankly sounds like a dare. They pause to look at you, twig hanging from your lip like a sleepy scholar's pipe, and one of them cackles. "You'll learn," she says. "Eventually, you'll stop trying new things and just stick to the twig." And honestly, you get it. There's a simplicity to it, a rhythm: chew, soften, scrub, rinse. It may not be glamorous, and it certainly isn't minty fresh, but it's accessible, universal. A clean mouth is a quiet defiance against the chaos of floods, grain shortages, and unpredictable temple taxes. Back at the Central Plaza, you catch sight of a merchant selling imported oil from the Levant. "For your hair or your breath," he shouts. He's holding a small clay vial and grinning like a man who absolutely uses his own product. You hesitate. It's expensive, but the thought of having something genuinely fragrant in your mouth is tempting. Instead, you settle for a pinch of cardamom seeds, cheaper and still effective. You chew them slowly, letting the oils coat your tongue. The taste is sweet, a bit spicy, and momentarily makes you forget the flavor of river silt. Combined with your third round of twig brushing, your mouth feels, if not clean, then at least pleasantly interesting. You end your mid-morning circuit back near your home, where the shadows have grown shorter and the air heavier. You sit beside your water jar, rinse your mouth with the last of the morning's clean scoop, and lay your latest twig out to dry on a flat stone. Around you, the quiet lull of midday begins. People retreat indoors, doors close softly, and even the animals seem to nap. You lie back on your woven mat and stare at the ceiling, painted faintly with traces of old smoke and the handprints of children who thought mud was decoration. You close your eyes and let your jaw relax. No mint, no floss, just you, your teeth, and a modest pile of used twigs. The midday heat is unrelenting, seeping into every surface like the gods are baking the city for dinner. Even the flies seem sluggish now, hovering lazily around clay jugs and occasionally colliding with walls as if heat drunk. You sit quietly in the shade, eyes half closed, your twig abandoned temporarily beside your foot. But you can't rest long. Not when your neighbor arrives breathlessly at your doorway, flapping her arms like she's about to deliver breaking news from the king himself. "They're treating a man at the temple," she whispers, lowering her voice dramatically. "Tooth pain, big one, swollen face, looks like he got stung by an angry spirit." You perk up, curiosity outweighing comfort, and follow her through the narrow back lanes. The temple is one of the grander buildings, more polished mud brick, shaded courtyards, and the unmistakable scent of burning juniper. It's both sacred space and the ancient version of an urgent care clinic. You slip inside the outer chamber where the priest healers tend to the sick. Today's patient is slumped against a support pillar, his face swollen on one side, his expression caught somewhere between pain and poetic resignation. A junior priest presses a cool reed cloth to his cheek, while an older figure prepares a small clay bowl of what looks like pulverized, dried garlic and onion skin. Yes, this is the healing part of the ritual. You edge closer, catching murmurs of a chant. The older priest begins to sing, waving a long blackened twig over the man's head like a wand. The twig is scorched at the tip, still faintly scented with myrrh. It's been part of a purification fire, both symbolic and, in their view, disinfecting. The priest touches it gently to the swollen cheek. You wince reflexively. So does the patient. The priest then scoops a dab of the garlic onion paste onto the brush end of the twig and inserts it, yes, into the man's mouth, brushing slowly along the gums while continuing the chant. The ritual is elaborate, layered, and suspiciously unhygienic by modern standards. But the patient is still. He trusts this process. It's not just medicine, it's spiritual realignment. In Mesopotamia, health is not simply physical. Pain is often thought to be the result of imbalance with the gods, with spirits, even with planetary alignments. Toothaches, obvious sign that something metaphysical has gone wrong. And of course, the worm theory. A junior healer begins to recite one of the more famous incantations, written on clay centuries earlier. After Anu had created the heavens, and the heavens had created the earth had created the rivers had created the canals had created the marsh had created the worm, and the worm came crying, "Feed me, or I shall gnaw your tooth." It's part creation myth, part medical warning, and part bedtime horror story. The tooth worm is thought to live deep inside the tooth, burrowing down like an evil little godless grub. When your mouth hurts, it's not rot or infection. It's that the worm is hungry. Historians still argue whether the tooth worm was a metaphor or a literal belief. Evidence suggests it may have been both, an attempt to explain a mysterious, unbearable pain in a world before nerves, bacteria, and root canals were understood. And the treatments? Often aimed at starving or smoking out the worm. Today, it's a twig soaked in bitter herbs and gently heated before use. The goal is to make the environment so unappealing that the worm simply leaves. Did it work? Maybe. Or maybe the placebo effect goes back much further than we thought. You glance around. Others have gathered now, quiet observers, offering polite nods and murmurs of sympathy. Someone hands the priest a tiny copper blade, but he waves it away. No extraction today. The gods aren't calling for blood, just a little burnt garlic and some very confident chanting. Eventually, the patient leans back with a groan. The swelling remains, but he's calmer. Someone presses a clay cup of barley water into his hands, and the crowd begins to drift away. You step out into the sun again, thinking about what you just witnessed. The lines between medicine, magic, and ritual are blurry here. A toothache isn't just annoying, it's cosmic. A punishment, a misalignment, a hungry worm's rebellion. Back in your own quarter of the city, you pick up your twig with newfound appreciation. No prayers, no paste, just quiet, repetitive motion. Left side, right side, circular scrapes around your back molars. Maybe it's not just about removing food or smoothing rough enamel. Maybe it's about asserting control. Tiny, daily acts of defiance in a world where sickness and spirits are everywhere. The wind picks up, rustling the palm fronds, carrying with it the scent of cooking lentils and scorched clay. A child darts past you, twig clenched between their teeth like a pirate with a dagger, shouting something about being the god of fish. Their younger sibling follows with a cooking spoon. You lean against a wall, chew thoughtfully, and wonder if you lived in a time where no one knew why teeth fell out or pain flared suddenly and unpredictably, wouldn't you invent a worm too? A neighbor walks past and grins at you. "Back from the temple?" she asks, seeing the scorch marks on your hands from where you touched the fire bowl. You nod. She pats your arm. "At least you didn't try the honey vinegar rinse. That one just makes everything sticky and sour." Fair point. You settle back into your spot as the afternoon shadows grow longer. You've got a fresh twig, a relatively non-possessed mouth, and a second-hand incantation stuck in your head. Not bad for a day in ancient dental care. The afternoon drags along in a slow, golden haze. Even the most enthusiastic market criers have dialed down their volume, and you're left with the gentle hum of flies, the distant clang of metal on clay, and the occasional splash of canal water as someone cools off their feet. You find yourself wandering again, this time toward the scribes' quarter, where men and boys etch words into wet clay with thin reeds and astonishing patience. There's a small stall near the edge of the square, barely more than a table, really, where a wiry old man sells second-hand tablets, not the modern kind. These are actual chunks of clay, each one dense with wedge-shaped cuneiform that reads like the diary of a very anxious civilization. Taxes, grain counts, star movements, and, yes, health complaints. You squat beside the stack, skimming the top row with mild interest until something catches your eye. A tiny, neat tablet, no bigger than your hand. You peer closer and make out the first few lines. Something about pain in the mouth, persistent discomfort after chewing dried lentils, and a recommendation for ash mixed with sheep fat as a remedy. Delightful. The old man sees your interest and leans over. Tooth pain, a lot of these talk about it. Second only to curses and barley taxes. He's not wrong. Dental woes were frequent enough to warrant their own genre in Mesopotamian writing. You flip through more tablets and spot a few that sound suspiciously like Yelp reviews of ancient healers. "Still in pain, but he gave me honey." Or, "Avoid the man with 3 braids. He pulled the wrong tooth." Historians still argue whether these references were written by patients, apprentices, or just bored scribes documenting whatever came their way. What's clear is that oral suffering was common and oddly poetic. Some tablets even describe pain using similes, like the bite of a sand viper curled in my gum. Honestly, not bad for 2000 BCE. You pocket the mental image and stroll on, heading now toward the bakery district. There's nothing quite like the smell of charred barley crust to distract from the idea of viper gum agony. The bakers are mid-shift, pulling rounds of bread from dome-shaped clay ovens. You watch one man expertly flip a hot loaf with a hook stick, the crust blackened just at the edges. You buy a small round for a few barley tokens and take a cautious bite. Warm, nutty, slightly gritty. That old familiar crunch of rock dust hidden in the flour makes a reappearance. You chew slowly, carefully, trying not to grind your molars into oblivion. The woman next to you laughs softly. "They say the stones sharpen your teeth," she jokes, "or break them. Both could be true." Back at home, you dig into your basket of hygiene supplies. Twigs of varying sizes, a bowl of crushed fennel seeds, a strip of linen for wiping, and a small pot of what might be salt. But you're starting to suspect it's just ground plaster. You choose a fresh twig, longer this time, and begin to chew the end down to a soft, brushable bloom. The friction is comforting now, like scratching an itch you didn't realize you had. You go tooth by tooth methodically. There's something strangely luxurious about giving each one your attention, as if you're saying, "Thank you for not falling out today." Across the courtyard, your neighbor is having her own tooth drama. She's sitting with her mouth open, allowing a young girl, possibly a niece, maybe an aspiring healer, to dab her gums with something pungent. You catch a whiff. Vinegar and crushed garlic again. A popular combination, despite the inevitable social consequences. "Does it work?" you ask gently. She grunts. "Tastes like regret. But it numbs the pain for a bit." Fair enough. Later, a traveling storyteller sets up shop near the well. You drift over with your twig tucked behind your ear like a scholar, hoping for a tale that doesn't involve murder, floods, or bureaucratic gods. What you get instead is a surprisingly light story about a merchant who tried to sell silver-plated chewing twigs to the king. The king used it once, the storyteller says, voice low and theatrical, then claimed it tasted like burnt fish and threw the merchant into the canal. The crowd laughs. You do too. It's oddly comforting to know that even royalty weren't immune to bad dental ideas. You lean back against a cool wall, the sky above fading into deep amber. You're not quite ready to eat again, not after that bread, but you do take another pass with your twig. You add a pinch of powdered anise to the bristles this time. It smells like something between licorice and clay pots. But hey, better than canal breath. As you clean, you think about all the time and effort that's gone into keeping mouths more or less functional for thousands of years. No fluoride, no professional cleanings, just improvisation and repetition. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing softly, a lullaby, or maybe just a song about oxen that accidentally sounds tender. The last rays of light stretch across the rooftops. Your jaw is sore, your breath smells vaguely of herbal soot, and your tongue finds the usual sore spot on your left molar. But your teeth are still in your head. You count that as a win. You swish with a little warm water, definitely not filtered, possibly shared by a lizard, and spit into a patch of dirt that's seen many such offerings. You place your used twig carefully on a flat stone. Tomorrow, you'll burn the ends and add them to the ash jar. There's always a use for ash around here. You stretch your arms, roll your shoulders, and give your mouth a final rinse. Not perfect, not pristine, but clean enough. And in ancient Mesopotamia, that's about as close to dental triumph as it gets. The sun slips below the edge of the city walls, painting the sky with dusky shades of copper and lavender. Evening in Mesopotamia has a certain hush to it, a lull not of silence, but of softened voices, slower footsteps, and a collective exhale from the entire population, humans, goats, and temple scribes alike. You've already finished brushing with your last twig for the day, this one from a slightly bitter branch that may or may not have been meant for incense, and now you're ambling toward a communal eating area just past the potter's stalls. The scent of lentils simmered with onion wafts through the air. It smells better than it looks. Everything in Mesopotamia does. You pause to sit on a clay bench, eyeing the bread again. Always the bread. It looks innocent enough. A small, rounded disc, browned on top, split down the middle like a miniature pillow. You tear off a bite and, as expected, encounter that familiar crunch. Not the satisfying kind. No, this is the signature, yes, there's probably stone dust in here kind of crunch. The kind that makes you wonder if bread is an aggressive participant in the erosion of human enamel. And here's the thing, That's not an accident. It's not sabotage. It's just that millstones in ancient Mesopotamia were made of rough, gritty stone. As grain was ground into flour, tiny particles of the stone itself would wear away and mix in. It's like seasoning, only instead of salt, it's ground up sandstone. Delicious. You chew carefully, watching your fellow diners. Some tear their bread into tiny pieces to avoid molar mishaps. Others just accept the inevitable. One older man near you simply dunks his bread in a bowl of sour yogurt until it turns to mush. Smart. Slightly suspicious, but smart. Historians still argue whether the grit in bread was something people tried to reduce or just something they shrugged off. Some sites show signs of smoother millstones, but others suggest that nobody really cared. Or perhaps they didn't connect the dots between eating gravel bread and my teeth have all fallen out by age 30. You swallow another bite and feel a sharp edge skim your gum. Oops, that's going to need extra twig time later. And this brings you to another rather charming fact. A lot of ancient Mesopotamians, based on archaeological evidence, had teeth worn down to stubs. Not rotten, necessarily, just ground flat. Like if your molars had been quietly filing themselves down over the years in protest of your snack choices. It's not always visible in the surviving skulls, but when it is, it's dramatic. You once overheard a traveler call it bread mouth. Not entirely inaccurate. You finish your meal with a slurp of lukewarm beer, not the fun kind. This is lightly fermented barley water, thin and cloudy, with a flavor best described as warm, chewy soup. It doesn't taste great, but it's safer than river water and softer on your teeth than a second helping of sandy bread. A woman across the courtyard taps her teeth with her fingernail. A gentle thunk, thunk, and then pulls out a familiar bundle. A little cloth bag holding 3 twigs, all at various stages of wear. She picks the one with the best tip and begins brushing, eyes closed, like someone savoring the last bit of a good story. You follow suit. You have a softer twig left, from a younger reed. It won't last long, but for tonight's final cleaning, it'll do. You chew it gently, watching the fibers separate, then begin your ritual strokes. It's not just about cleanliness anymore. It's habit, comfort, almost a kind of prayer. The scraping sound is quiet, intimate. You imagine dozens of others across the city doing the same, like a lullaby in wood and breath. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the soft brushing echo from other homes, like cicadas murmuring secrets to the twilight. You pass a group of children playing near the canal. One of them has a loose front tooth and is proudly wobbling it with their tongue. Their sibling teases them, threatening to yank it out with a bit of string and a lucky coin. You smile, remembering when you used to think losing a tooth meant the gods were making space for a better one. Spoiler, they weren't. Back at home, you find your family huddled around a fire telling stories. One of the uncles is midway through an exaggerated tale about the time he bit into a boiled locust and lost 2 teeth. Not from the locust, he says. From the boiled stone they served it on. Everyone laughs. Someone offers you a fig. You decline. Figs are sticky, dangerous terrain for a tired jaw. You return to your quiet spot near the door, rinse your twig one last time, and lay it on the drying rock, neatly beside your others. It joins a small forest of used and discarded twigs, some blackened, some brittle, all veterans of a day's worth of chewing. The stars begin to peek out from behind the thick haze of cooking smoke and dust. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays softly, followed by the bark of a dog and the rhythmic clap of sandals on stone. You lie back on your mat, tongue poking gently at your teeth, mentally noting which ones feel rough, which ones feel suspiciously hollow. Nothing sharp, nothing too alarming. No worms tonight, just twigs and quiet. The fire crackles softly. Someone snores. The night embraces you with its warmth, and the taste of fennel and fig still lingers on your tongue. One more day survived. One more day with most of your teeth. Not bad. Morning returns with the same predictable grace as always, slowly, gently, and with just enough goat noise to make sure you don't sleep in. The city of Ur stretches awake around you, stone by stone, brick by brick, breath by breath. Fires are lit, doors creak open, and the first clay bowls clatter as water is scooped and splashed for the morning rinse. You're already halfway through softening a new twig by the time the sun crests the rooftops. It's a thin one today from a batch you bought 2 days ago, already starting to dry out at the ends. You bite down gently and begin the slow chew, twisting the fibers open like a sleepy florist arranging a very tiny broom. As you begin brushing, you pass a courtyard where a healer is mid-ritual. There's incense burning, thick and sweet, curling around the clay figures lined up along the edge of the fountain. It's a spiritual cleaning ceremony, mostly for the soul, but the teeth, apparently, get a little attention too. The healer lifts a long stick of burnt myrrh, not unlike your twig, and runs it just above the forehead of her patient, muttering something about worm expulsion and blessings of the canal gods. You raise an eyebrow, but honestly, at this point, nothing surprises you. The idea of the tooth worm isn't just local myth, it's basically oral health dogma. The worm lives in your mouth, causes pain when hungry, and can be coaxed out through smoke, bitter herbs, or the occasional whispered threat. This theory appears in texts carved into clay nearly 4,000 years ago, and fascinatingly, stuck around in various cultures long after. Historians still argue whether this belief began as an observational metaphor or a genuine fear of microscopic mouth monsters. One thing's for sure, ancient Mesopotamians had no love for invisible intruders, whether they lived in your molars or your dreams. You wander past a small shrine, low to the ground, and flanked by 2 modest clay lions. Offerings lie in front, mostly dried fruit, a few petals, and quite memorably, a human tooth. Clean, intact, slightly discolored. Someone, somewhere, decided this was an appropriate tithe. You silently wish the tooth good luck in the afterlife. A young boy passes you chewing on a thick stick like he's training for some kind of twig-eating competition. His mother trails behind, carrying a jar of what looks like dental paste, a cloudy mixture of salt, crushed mint, and, if your nose is right, a dash of cumin. She dips her finger in, rubs a bit along his gums, and mutters a prayer. He grimaces, but doesn't resist. Nearby, a group of young apprentices sit outside a small schoolhouse, practicing script on clay tablets and arguing over the spelling of a particularly tricky grain measurement phrase. One boy has a split reed between his teeth, absent-mindedly gnawing while he writes. It's not exactly dental care, but it's something. You stop at a nearby stall for breakfast, soft barley porridge this time, thankfully free of grit, and sit at the edge of the street, where a breeze stirs the dust in lazy swirls. The vendor offers you a bite of fermented yogurt and a small cup of what he swears is good for the teeth. You sip cautiously. It's bitter, very bitter. Bark infusion, he explains, soaks into the teeth, keeps worms confused. You nod like that makes sense and discreetly set the cup aside. After breakfast, you continue your walk, now approaching the outer edge of the city where farmers bring in carts of reeds and produce. There's a well-worn footpath winding alongside a modest irrigation canal, and here the tooth conversations are more practical. An older man, missing 2 front teeth, is telling a teen how to prepare twigs from date palms without splitting them. Peel the outer skin first, he says, or it'll fray too fast and stab you in the gum. You'll see stars and spit blood for a week. Solid advice. A woman near them listens in, nodding, and adds her own tip. Use hot water to soak them overnight. Makes them soft by morning. You tuck that away for later. Soon, you reach a quieter district, residential, with low walls and wide courtyards. In one, a family is gathered for what appears to be a shared cleaning session. Everyone, from the grandfather to the smallest toddler, has some version of a twig in hand. Some are just chewing. Others are brushing slowly in unison. A sort of dental choreography. You've never seen anything quite so wholesome and mildly unsettling. You pause under the shade of a fig tree and notice the bark, thin, pliable, and peeling. You strip a small piece and rub it between your fingers. It smells faintly sweet, possibly worth trying later as a new type of brush. The hunt for the perfect twig never really ends. By midday, the sun is high again, and you find yourself back in a shaded corner of the market. A traveling merchant has set up a strange display, a polished wooden box with various twigs labeled in tidy Sumerian: desert thorn, river ash, mountain myrtle, sand acacia. He claims each has its own mouth aura. You listen politely, trying not to giggle. He offers you a free sample of dune bristle, a stiff, almost crunchy twig that tastes faintly like pepper and regret. You politely decline a second. Still, the idea of choice is intriguing. Tooth twigs as personality statements. You imagine someone confidently announcing, "Oh, I only use temple cedar. It matches my aura." You pocket a sprig of the softer river ash to try later. No harm in testing the luxury line. Evening settles once again. You're home, feet dusty, fingers slightly sticky from date paste, and your jaw pleasantly sore from a full day's worth of nibbling, brushing, and the occasional tooth-related barter. You rinse one last time with warm water, chew your twig until it's soft, and clean each tooth with methodical care. Around you, the city exhales again, the night's second sigh. And somewhere in the shadows, you imagine the toothworm, if it exists, curled up in a corner of your mouth, bored, bitter, and utterly unamused by your dedication. Let it be. You're walking along the edge of the canal again, where the air smells like sun-warmed reeds and a hint of fish that's seen better days. This time of day, the liminal late afternoon, always feels suspended in amber. Not quite evening, not quite day. People move slowly. Shadows stretch longer, and the clatter of pottery from kitchens begins to echo through narrow alleyways. You decide it's time for a wash, not a deep scrub. That happens less frequently in Mesopotamia. Maybe once a week, maybe on temple feast days. But today, calls for a decent rinse. You duck into the public bath, or what passes for one, a walled space fed by a trickling stream diverted from the main canal, lined with smooth stones and attended by a boy who probably has no idea how much water he's splashing all over himself. You strip off your outer robe, squat beside the low pool, and scoop water over your arms and face. The water is cool, silty, and smells faintly metallic. Not a bad thing. Mesopotamians actually believed mineral-rich water had purifying properties. You dip your hands in again, rubbing at the grime around your neck. To your right, a man is carefully cleaning between his toes with what looks like a repurposed tooth twig. You eye him cautiously. He notices. "New twig after this," he says cheerfully. "I'm not an animal." Fair enough. Public baths are noisy, social places. People chat, argue, plan weddings, trade recipes. But everyone has their own version of a cleaning routine. Some use ashes from burned barley husks mixed with water to scrub their skin. Others smear themselves with a kind of mud paste and let it dry, then flake it off like scaly armor, leaving skin beneath somewhat smoother. And yet, for all this effort, no one is using anything remotely like soap. Soap, at least as we understand it, exists in its infancy. But it's a long way from sudsy, floral-scented bars. It's made from mixing ash with fat and water, creating something vaguely cleansing and very, very pungent. It's mostly used for laundering clothes and temple tools, not bodies. You slather your hands with mud, let it dry just a bit, and scrape it off with a flat reed scraper. The friction does most of the work, but it leaves your skin with that satisfying, slightly sanded sensation. You finish with a rinse to the face and neck, shaking water from your ears like a wet jackal. Then comes the oral portion of the ritual. Your twig, chosen with care, is still relatively fresh, bark peeled, end frayed, and previously soaked in a tiny bit of fennel water from a jar you keep tucked away. You chew the end again to revive the bristles, then brush in slow, familiar strokes. You're not alone. Others around you are doing the same. It's not coordinated, but there's a quiet synchronicity to it, like birds fluffing their feathers before sleep. A young man nearby has a different approach. He's got a crushed flower bud rolled into a little paste, which he smears on his twig with the confidence of someone who read exactly one tablet about cosmetic herbs and now thinks he's a dental innovator. He notices you watching and grins. "Petal polish," he says. "Smells like jasmine, maybe, or just old water." You sniff cautiously. "Definitely jasmine. Possibly overripe." He shrugs. "Still better than garlic paste." "True, at least jasmine doesn't double as insect repellent." You sit back against a warm wall, letting the last rays of sun dry your skin. Around you, the sounds of brushing continue. Scritch, scratch, swish, swish, like soft wind against reeds. The bathhouse might not be luxurious, but there's something restorative about it. A full-body tune-up, complete with dental soundtrack. Historians still argue whether public baths in Mesopotamia were primarily hygienic or religious. Likely both. Cleanliness was considered not only practical, but spiritually important, especially before visiting temples or performing certain rituals. There are entire prayers focused on purification, many of which include brushing the mouth as a central component. One particularly poetic line from an old hymn reads, "May my tongue be clean, that I might speak to the gods without shame." You rinse your mouth one final time with the bath water, Risky, yes, but tradition is tradition. You avoid swallowing strongly. Then it's time to dry off. There are no towels, of course, so you stand in the sun for a moment, arms outstretched like a lizard. It works. Sort of. You pull your tunic back over your head and smooth it down. Sand sticking to your still damp skin in defiance of your whole cleansing effort. Outside the bathhouse, the streets are quieter now. Shadows stretch long, and homes glow with firelight behind reed windows. You walk slowly, savoring the soft taste left in your mouth from the flower bud someone slipped into your rinse bowl when you weren't looking. Lavender, maybe? Possibly dirt. You pass two boys brushing side by side with mismatched twigs, one frayed and splintered, the other slick with overuse. They argue about whose twig came from the clean tree, whatever that means, and when the last full moon blessed it. They're not joking. They believe it. You let yourself smile. Back home, your mat is laid out neatly. A bowl of water waits for rinsing, and your favorite twig, soaked in a hint of fennel and ash, is ready for the final scrub of the day. You chew, you brush, you rinse. The bath might not have changed your life, but your mouth feels clearer, your head a bit lighter, and your breath, well, less offensive than before. Possibly even floral. Just don't get too close to anyone to check. You lie back, sigh softly, and let the night take its hold. The stars blink above you, twinkling through the slight haze of clay dust and temple incense. Somewhere, a donkey brays a lullaby. And your mouth, it's clean, or as clean as 1750 BCE gets. By the time the rooster, not your favorite neighbors, but close enough, calls out its pre-dawn warning, you're already stirring under your mat. The air is cooler this morning, almost chilly, and you can smell the dew evaporating off clay tiles before the sun even shows its face. Another day, another opportunity to not lose a tooth. You roll up from your sleeping mat and stretch your arms toward the ceiling, jaw already opening in a half yawn. And like clockwork, you reach for your twig. Today's is one of the thicker ones from a bundle you stored near the fire pit. Its bark is cracked from the heat, but still soft enough to chew. You bite the tip, working it slowly, fraying it into a fibrous fan with the patience of someone who's done this every day since childhood. Because you probably have. You begin brushing, walking the perimeter of your courtyard. The ground is cool on your feet, the birds chattering from the edge of a fig tree where last night's fig thief, a very smug monkey, was last seen. The scraping sound of the twig against your teeth is quiet, but familiar. It's almost a mantra now. From next door, your neighbor's voice calls over the wall. "Boiled date paste stuck in my molars," she groans. Again. You answer with a sympathetic, mouth full of twig, and keep brushing. As the city wakes around you, you start to notice things you hadn't before, like the subtle differences in how each person uses their twig. The merchant across the street, fast, aggressive strokes like he's chiseling a price into marble. The potter's apprentice, slow, dreamy rotations almost like a dance. The elderly woman at the corner, she just chews it, never brushes, believing the gods prefer a passive cleansing. You've seen twig cleaning methods evolve over generations, and you've seen a wide range of preferences in what goes on the twigs too. Vinegar, mustard seed paste, dry salt, crushed olives. Some people even rub a bit of fish oil on theirs, claiming it soothes the gums. It doesn't. It's also absolutely terrible for your breath. But never let that stop anyone. You duck into a tiny garden space shared by several households. Here, among the wild herbs and goat droppings, a few plants grow specifically for their role in oral care. There's anise and mint, yes, but also something called bitter root, a vaguely threatening name for a plant whose leaves, when crushed, produce a strong, astringent paste. You gather a few leaves, roll them between your palms, and press the juice into your twig's bristles. It stings a bit, but in a good way. The kind of sting that says, this might be working or at least pretending to. A boy walks by carrying a bundle of firewood. You recognize him from the tablet school near the canal. He's chewing a stubby twig between his teeth and stops when he sees you prepping yours. "Do you use clay powder?" he asks earnestly. "Only when I want to taste the floor," you reply, grinning. He laughs, clearly pleased by the answer. "My uncle swears by it. Says it keeps the worms from building houses in your teeth." You nod thoughtfully. "Worm houses, that's a new one." He continues on, and you linger in the garden for a moment longer, letting the morning sun warm your back. It's a new day, but your ritual doesn't change. Chew, soften, scrub, swish, rinse, breathe. You remember an overheard conversation from a few nights ago. Two women whispering in the bathhouse about an upper-class family who had their twigs carved from imported woods. "Polished by moonlight," one had claimed. "Blessed by priests," the other added. You're not sure which part was the joke. There's certainly a divide between the twig habits of the wealthy and the not-so-wealthy. Elites might have the luxury of choosing their brushes by scent and color. The rest? You work with what grows beside your house or washes up in bundles near the canal. But strangely, the poorer twigs often work better. Softer, more flexible, less likely to splinter mid-scrub. Historians still argue whether the elite's more exotic dental rituals were for health or ceremony. Some of their toothpastes included powdered pearls, saffron, or even dried petals, things more symbolic than scrubbing. It might have made their breath smell like a temple offering, but it probably didn't help with plaque. You pause at your neighbor's wall to hand her one of your garden twigs. "Bitter, but effective," you tell her. She chews experimentally. "Tastes like burnt celery," she says, "but my mouth feels zingy." Exactly. You return to your corner of the courtyard and sit quietly on the cool stone, brushing once more around the lower molars, those crumb collectors of the ancient world. You take your time. It's meditative. You're not brushing to impress anyone. You're brushing because your mouth belongs to you, and you'd prefer not to spend the night with throbbing gums. Above you, the sky lightens into a warm glow. The first traders pass by the gate, their donkeys heavy with oil jars and barley sacks. A temple bell rings once, soft but resonant. Somewhere, someone sneezes. Probably the man with the fish oil twigs. You do a final rinse, sip a bit of barley water, and gently run your tongue over your teeth. They feel smooth, slightly bitter, but smooth. You dry your twig and set it out in the sun. Another day's service completed. It's not glamorous. It's not minty fresh. But in this old and dust-covered city, among gods and goats, canals and clay, your daily tooth ritual connects you to something ancient and oddly enduring. You, your twig, and the stubborn refusal to let your teeth be eaten by mythical worms. You're sitting by the canal again, this time with the confidence of someone who's learned exactly where the goats relieve themselves and how to avoid stepping in it. The air is soft with the smell of silt and damp reeds, and there's a woman nearby hanging out bundles of herbs to dry, twisting twine into neat loops and humming a tune that sounds vaguely like a lullaby for stubborn teeth. You chew on a fresh twig from your now dwindling bundle, this one with a hint of natural sweetness. Maybe fig, maybe something more exotic. You never remember which tree is which anymore, but this one's got promise. Soft fibers, gentle on the gums, just enough resistance to make you feel like you're doing something without turning it into a jaw workout. As you brush, you spot something familiar near the herb bundles. A small clay jar filled with powder, capped with what looks like a scrap of goat hide. You've seen this before. It's tooth powder, or at least the Mesopotamian version of it. The woman notices your glance and offers it up. "Spicy," she warns, tapping the lid. You dip your twig just slightly, then taste. It's not spicy, more like biting into a leaf that's been sunbathing with cumin. There's a dusty warmth to it, with a strange aftertaste that tickles your tongue. Not unpleasant, just vivid. It lingers like a gossip you didn't mean to overhear. It's a mix of crushed anise, fennel seed, and something gritty, maybe charred date pit. Everyone has their own blend. Some families pass them down like stew recipes. Others experiment wildly, like the man you once met who tried powdered fish scale and had to live with minty seafood breath for a week. You continue brushing, watching the herb seller explain the recipe to a passing priest. He nods solemnly, hands her a token, and leaves with a pouch tucked into his robe. Even the gods need clean teeth, apparently. Historians still argue whether these powders were medical, magical, or both. Some formulas include actual prayer inscriptions written onto tablets and ground into the mix, literally brushing your teeth with holy words. Was it to bless your smile, to protect your breath from spirits, or just to say, "I scrub with scripture, don't judge me"? The sky shifts toward afternoon now. Warmth radiates from the ground, and the stones along the canal are hot to the touch. You move into the shade of a fig tree where a few others have gathered. One man is boiling something over a small flame. You don't ask. You've learned not to, but the smell hits you a moment later. Sharp, medicinal, and extremely unchewable. "Willow bark infusion," he says proudly. "Good for the gums." You nod, impressed. Willow bark is known even today for its salicylic acid, an ancient precursor to aspirin. They don't know the chemistry, of course. They just know it numbs things. Some people chew it directly. Others, like this ambitious gent, make a rinse. You accept a small sip. It's bitter, really bitter. But your gums tingle pleasantly afterward, and when you resume brushing, it feels smoother somehow. Less work. Like the bark laid down a temporary peace treaty between twig and enamel. Around you, the conversation drifts to gossip. Who's got a new tooth missing? Who married someone with breath like boiled onions? Who tried to sell snakeskin as a cure for molar pain and is now banned from 3 temples? You tune it out, focusing on the brushing, up and down, side to side, gently over the tongue for good measure. The tree's shade ripples with a breeze, and you glance at your reflection in the canal. It's murky, sure, but you can see your teeth. Not white, never white, but strong, mostly straight. Worn, yes, but solid. You smile. Sort of. It's not vanity, it's gratitude. in a place where bread fights back and figs cling to your molars like regret. Teeth that last are worth celebrating. A child approaches, holding out a tiny frayed twig, barely longer than a finger. Too short? They ask. You take it, inspect it, and nod. Good for the front teeth, you offer. Just don't stab the roof of your mouth. They nod seriously and run off to try again, like a warrior testing a new sword. You finish your brushing with a swish of water from a shared jug, definitely not clean, but you pour it first over your hands to show respect for the rinse. You spit discreetly behind a stone, aiming away from the path. Etiquette matters, even in dental hygiene. The fig tree above rattles slightly, a crow hopping from branch to branch. You remember the story told at the bathhouse last week? That crows peck out bad teeth from corpses if they aren't offered a prayer first. Possibly superstition. Possibly a poetic warning to keep your mouth in order. You tuck your twig into your sash and stand, stretching. Your breath carries that faint herbal scent now, a mix of whatever spice the powder contained and that stubborn trace of willow bark. You could do worse. As you walk home, the streets begin to fill again with the late-day shuffle. Tradespeople returning with empty carts, bakers handing off the last of the evening loaves, temple boys racing to beat the curfew. You pass them all, your jaw sore, but your mouth feeling oddly light. Back at home, you lay out your used twigs to dry. Some are still good for tomorrow. Others have frayed past salvation and will go into the fire. You hum the tune from earlier, maybe the lullaby, maybe the one about pickled onions, who can say, and settle into your evening rhythm. Another day, another dozen scrapes. No blood, no cracking sounds, no dreams of tooth worms whispering in your molars. You call that a victory. It's twilight now, that softly glowing hour when shadows stretch like lazy cats across courtyards and the whole city seems to exhale. You've had your evening barley meal, mercifully free of grit this time, and you're sitting cross-legged near a flickering oil lamp, twirling a fresh twig between your fingers like a nervous scholar before an exam. Tonight feels like the right time for a more focused clean. You select a thick, springy twig from your small reserve, something with a bit of bite to it. You know this one's good. It came from a cousin's trip east. Traded for with dried fish and a semi-legible poem, it smells vaguely like cedar and warm sand. You chew the end thoughtfully, the fibers softening under your molars until they fan out like the bristles of a miniature broom. You begin your brushing, starting at the molars, those back alley teeth where date paste goes to die. The scrubbing sound is faint but satisfying, like broom straw against a sun-warmed clay floor. You pause every so often to rinse with water from a small ceramic cup. Not too cold, not too warm, just right. Someone nearby strums a lyre, clumsily, but with feeling. The melody wobbles in and out of key, but it adds to the mood. You're not brushing in silence. You're brushing to music. A girl passes by humming the same tune, trailing a little cloud of dust and a twig clenched tightly between her teeth like a pirate with a dagger. You raise your eyebrows in admiration. That's one way to clean your incisors. As you work your way toward the front teeth, you add a bit of powdered myrrh, a little treat you saved from market day. The resin clings to the bristles and fills your mouth with a dry, slightly bitter flavor as if you've licked a perfume jar. But the scent is calming, and your breath, arguably improved. Historians still argue whether imported ingredients like myrrh and frankincense were used more for religious purposes or for personal care. The evidence suggests both. These were not cheap materials. If you were brushing with myrrh, you were either wealthy, connected to a temple, or very good at haggling. You're none of those, but you did trade a pair of dried figs and a carved shell bead for this pinch. Totally worth it. Next, you try something new. A friend recently recommended a tooth polish made from crushed lentil husks and river sand. Only a pinch, she said. Don't grind your gums off. You dip your twig gently into the mixture and return to the molars. The result? Gritty. Extremely gritty. It feels like brushing with the floor of a pottery workshop, but strangely effective. Your teeth don't feel cleaner exactly, but they feel abraded. That's something. You rinse, spit, and sigh. A good clean, even with minor gum irritation, is better than waking up tomorrow with that telltale throb behind the canine. The air cools further, and nearby someone lights incense. The scent of dried juniper and sandalwood wafts through the courtyard. You lean back, twigs still dangling from your mouth, and stare up at the faint constellation pattern scratched into your ceiling beams. An old family ritual for keeping dreams pleasant and spirits uninterested. You remember another story, told by a toothless basket weaver during a particularly slow trade day. She claimed that twigs only worked if you prayed over them first. No prayer, no protection. The worm listens, she said, eyes wide and serious. He knows when you're lazy. You're not entirely convinced the worm has ears, but just in case, you whisper a half-hearted incantation under your breath. Something about peace to the tooth, silence to the mouth, and no surprises at dawn. You keep brushing. A knock sounds at your door. It's your neighbor's son, the one with the overbite and an unhealthy fondness for date candy. He's holding his cheek and sniffling. Tooth, he mutters. You invite him in and examine his mouth by lamplight. One molar swollen, the gum pink and puffy. You nod like you've seen this before, which you have, and hand him one of your softer twigs. Chew the end, you instruct, slowly, then press here. You point gently to the spot between his aching tooth and the inside of his cheek. He winces, but obeys. You add a dab of your willow bark rinse to the twig and offer him a sip. He gags slightly. You nod in understanding. Yes, it tastes like burnt furniture. Still, he manages to chew the twig into usable bristles and gently scrapes at his teeth. You show him how to press, not jab, how to work the gum line without making the worm angry, because apparently that's the measure now. After a few minutes, he seems calmer. Not pain-free, but better. You pack him off with 2 extra twigs and a small pinch of your myrrh powder. His mother will think you're a genius or a menace. Either way, you'll take it. You return to your own brushing, finishing with a gentle pass over your tongue, a delicate art requiring just the right balance of pressure and bravery. You rinse, spit one last time, and lean back again, listening to the lyre player finally, blessedly, tune the instrument. Your mouth feels lighter now, not minty, not clinical, but clean, gritless, cleared of the day's culinary mistakes and philosophical debates about twigs and worms. You set your brush down, the bristles now darkened and splayed like a tiny, exhausted broom. You'll burn this one tomorrow, add its ashes to the pile, maybe use them to bless a batch of new paste. You lie down beneath the stars and let your jaw go slack, the taste of resin lingering faintly on your breath. You think, not for the first time, that even if the gods didn't invent dentistry, they must at least appreciate a good cleaning, especially before dreams. The sky brightens slowly again, its pastel hues melting over the rooftops like warm clay. Another Mesopotamian morning, crisp with the scent of baked dust and steaming porridge. You stir beneath your blanket of woven reed and sheep wool, blinking against the soft golden light. As always, your first thought is not about work or gods or even breakfast. It's about your teeth. You sit up, stretching your arms overhead and working your jaw side to side. No mysterious throbbing, no weird dreams of the toothworm nibbling at your soul. A good sign, a blessing. You reach for your twig. Today's is shorter than you'd like, more nub than brush at this point. But you're feeling frugal, waste not, want not, especially when the good fig branches are harder to find now that the neighbor's tree has been mysteriously trimmed by a group of overly enthusiastic goats. You chew the end gently, coaxing it into bristles, and begin the familiar strokes. Your technique is solid by now. Upward from the roots, then circular at the edges, then a gentle scrub along the gums. You don't rush. This isn't just maintenance, it's meditation. As you brush, the household around you begins to stir. One of the older children sneezes dramatically and announces, through a mouthful of yawns, that their back tooth is trying to escape. Their mother replies without missing a beat, "Then you must have said something unclean yesterday." You smile. The belief that misdeeds could cause your teeth to rebel isn't uncommon. More than one clay tablet mentions the idea that gossip, cursing, or speaking against the gods could lead to toothaches. There's even an old priest's proverb, "May your tongue rot not, lest your molars mourn." Historians still argue whether this was metaphor, myth, or just early dental guilt tripping. Likely, it was all three. You finish your brushing and wipe your mouth with a bit of cloth that's definitely seen better days. It smells faintly of onion, but you tell yourself it's character. You rinse with the last bit of water left in the jug, warm, slightly silty, and resolve to get a fresh bucket from the canal after breakfast. Today is a market day, and that means bustle. Cloaks flapping in the breeze, vendors yelling over each other about their pure barley, their divinely blessed onions, and inevitably, their child-safe chewing twigs. That last one always gets a raised eyebrow. Is there a child-inappropriate twig, one that bites back? You wander through the rows of baskets and pottery, eyes scanning for a fresh batch of dental supplies. At one stall, a man with suspiciously shiny teeth is hawking a paste made from crushed berries and sacred salt. You ask him, what makes the salt sacred? "It came from a dried-up temple fountain," he says proudly. "You consider this? Temple runoff is probably not what the gods had in mind when they offered divine blessings, but here we are." You pass a group of children clustered around a potter who's offering a very Mesopotamian prize. Small clay animals shaped like gods, gifted to whoever guesses the correct number of pebbles in his jar. One boy, clearly distracted, is rubbing a tiny twig along his front teeth without even thinking. A natural habit. No coaxing needed. You pause near a stall selling perfumed oils and see a woman rubbing a small dab of minty goo onto her gums. She grimaces. "Too strong?" you ask. "No," she replies. "Perfect. Burns just enough to remind me I'm alive." She offers you a taste. You decline. You remember the last time you let someone talk you into trying their miracle gum balm and the 3 hours of unrelenting tingle that followed. Instead, you purchase a modest bundle of twigs from a reed-wrapped basket, thin, slightly green still, smelling of wet bark and pepper. The seller tosses in a small pouch of crushed anise for free. "For the spirit worm," he says, deadpan. You smile. May it go hungry. You return home and find the children still arguing about baby teeth, one proudly wiggling a loose one, the other poking at their own in a dramatic show of anticipation. You remember your own childhood, being told that lost teeth must be buried near the threshold to keep them from being taken by night spirits. You did it once. The dog dug it up. You buried it again. The spirit probably got confused and moved on. You decide this is the perfect moment to share some hard-earned adult wisdom. Chew your twigs longer, you say to the kids. Let them soften. Don't rush the brush. They groan. One flops over theatrically. You always say that. That's because it's still true, you reply, flicking a stray fig seed off your tunic. Later, as the sun climbs higher and heat begins to rise off the clay rooftops, you sit in your favorite corner with your new twig and a fresh splash of anise powder. The brushing is slower this time. You let the bristles settle over each tooth like a whisper, like the brush is telling you stories from long ago. You think about your grandmother's rituals, the same brush routine, always at dawn and dusk, always while humming the same wordless melody that never changed. She'd say things like, "Brush like a priest writing a prayer," or "The teeth remember if you rush them." You hum the melody now. It helps. By the time you finish, your jaw aches slightly, but in a good way. You rinse, swish, spit into a crack in the stone where you've spat 1,000 times before. It's your spot. Sacred in its own very personal, slightly gross way. You lean back, squinting at the sky. A good cleaning, a better twig, and no toothache in sight, at least for now. You're perched on a ledge just outside the city's southern gate, where the sun slips sideways over the edge of the fields, and the breeze carries with it that sweet, earthy scent of freshly turned mud and distant dung. It's late afternoon, too early for dinner, too late for naps, and you're waiting for someone. Specifically, the traveling trader who promised you something very rare, very pointy, very Mesopotamian. You hope it's another bundle of twigs. Last time, he brought what he called a mouth rake, which turned out to be a sharpened fish bone tied to a stick. Inventive, yes. Advisable, not remotely. While you wait, you find yourself running your tongue along the backs of your teeth. There's that familiar grit, subtle, but definitely there. Probably from the date paste you had with lunch, which, in retrospect, was more paste than date. You pull out the twig you've been saving, the one from the river ash tree. It's slightly dry now, but you chew it patiently, softening the fibers like you're teasing out secrets from a bundle of straw. And then the brushing begins. You're mid-scrub when a pair of archaeologists walk by. Not actual archaeologists, of course, those won't exist for a few thousand years, but the local dig team from the temple, tasked with excavating the foundations of an older shrine that sank mysteriously during a rainy season 5 decades ago. These guys dig in the dirt, argue about pottery, and, importantly, find old bones and teeth. You wave them over? They're dusty and mildly sunburned, and one of them is holding a flat slab of baked clay etched with neat little lines, likely an inventory tablet. "Any new teeth?" you ask casually, because, yes, that's the sort of thing you ask in this version of reality. "6 molars," one replies. "2 cracked, 1 still embedded in a jaw. Very ceremonial burial." You nod solemnly, pretending to know what that means. Then he adds, "There was plaque, thick, like tree bark. Lovely." This is the strange beauty of Mesopotamian archaeology. So much of what's known about dental hygiene comes not from books or scrolls, but from what's left behind in pots, bones, and the odd toothbrush-shaped artifact. The patterns of wear tell you what kind of food people ate, how often they chewed, and sometimes even what they tried to brush with. Historians still argue whether certain bristle-shaped grooves on clay pots were used for cleaning utensils or teeth, or possibly both. Because why not multitask? The archaeologists wander off, muttering about a suspiciously toothless skull, and you return to your scrubbing, now focused on your lower incisors. They always catch the worst of the bread grit. Just then, the trader arrives, puffing slightly and dragging a donkey that appears deeply unimpressed by its own existence. From one of the saddlebags, he pulls a bundle tied with frayed linen. "Here," he says proudly, "straight from the northern forests." You untie the bundle and inhale. A slightly minty, resinous scent, definitely not local. These twigs are darker, smoother, with bark that peels like curled paper. You pick one, weigh it in your hand. It's almost elegant. You test the end with a chew, soft, subtle, with a taste like pine and faint regret. You love it. "How much?" you ask. 3 dried plums and 1 story, he replies. Done. You give him the plums and launch into a completely fabricated tale about a temple priest who tamed a tooth worm by singing lullabies to it every night for a year. The trader laughs. The donkey yawns. Everyone wins. With your new twig in hand, you start brushing again as you wander back into the city. You pass a wall etched with names, ancient graffiti, some of it likely written by clay stylus, some possibly with charcoal or soot. You scan the scrawls and find one that makes you snort. Sargon has bad breath. Anonymous. Even in ancient times, shade was real. You stop near a home where someone's boiling down crushed olive pits. To polish the enamel, she explains, as though enamel is something any of you fully understand. She hands you a bit, just enough to rub into the bristles of your new twig. You do, and resume cleaning. It's gritty, but smooth, like chewing on a well-made bowl. Later, back home, you bring out your tiny collection of used-up twigs, blackened at the ends, bristles flattened from 100 passes over your tired teeth. You snap a few and toss them into the hearth. The rest you crush into powder to sprinkle over compost or mix into new paste. Waste nothing. You sit back with your new forest bristle twig, give it one last chew, and let your fingers trace the grooves left in your molars over the years. You know them all, like a cartographer knows riverbeds. The stars appear one by one above the rooftops. Your mouth feels clean. Your tongue has nowhere to hide any more food particles. The worm, if he ever existed, is bored stiff. You lie down, the new twig laid reverently beside your mat, ready for the morning. The donkey brays one last time somewhere in the distance, like punctuation at the end of a sentence you didn't know was ending, and you smile. Because your teeth are still here, still strong, still yours. It's early evening again, and love is in the air, or at least something vaguely floral that's been mixed with sweat, fermented lentils, and a hint of burning fish oil. You're sitting near the outer wall of the temple plaza, chewing slowly on a twig while observing the courtship rituals of the neighborhood with a kind of casual anthropological interest. Across the way, a young man is nervously adjusting his tunic, checking his reflection in the glazed surface of a water jug. He discreetly removes a twig from behind his ear, chews the end into bristles, and starts brushing. His technique is rushed, panicked, a little wild. He's clearly trying to make his breath acceptable before speaking to the girl at the incense stall. You watch with sympathy. We've all been there. Romance in Mesopotamia isn't all poetic stargazing and hand-carved love letters. It's also a very real negotiation between attraction and hygiene. Imagine leaning in for a whisper under a palm tree, only to catch a whiff of someone's last meal clinging desperately to their back molars. Not ideal. You chew your own twig more thoughtfully, letting the fibers bloom gently before brushing. Tonight, you've added a bit of crushed clove to your bristles, gifted from a trader who claims it was blessed by a temple singer. It might be a lie, but it smells wonderful, strong, warm, and just enough to distract from the faint smell of canal nearby. You think back to an old tale passed around the weaver's quarter, a bride who refused to kiss her groom at the altar because he hadn't smoked the worm from his breath. The priest declared the marriage void, and the man went on to invent a kiss-proof herbal rinse made of mint, vinegar, and desperation. It didn't work, but the story stuck. Historians still argue whether dental cleanliness played a formal role in Mesopotamian marriage rituals. There are references to purification ceremonies that mention the mouth, and a few rare tablets that describe the preparation of herbal breath tonics. But whether this was love, law, or just an early attempt at making dating less dangerous is still unclear. What is clear is that people cared about how they smelled, about how their mouths felt, about whether or not they could whisper sweet nothings without invoking the taste of last night's lentil soup. You take a seat near the fire pit where your neighbor, the matchmaker, is chatting with a woman holding a bouquet of reed flowers and a worried look. They're negotiating a dowry, yes, but also exchanging recipes for what to do about morning mouth. One of them suggests soaking twigs overnight in boiled anise. Another swears by chewing roasted barley husks. The gods gave us barley, she says, and then they gave us the consequences. Later, a small performance begins in the square, a traveling poet reciting verses about the goddess Inanna and her golden smile. The line, "Her breath sweeter than myrrh on the wind," gets an audible reaction from the crowd. Someone nearby mutters, "Bet she brushed." The young man from earlier finally approaches the incense girl. He leans in, says something. She laughs. Encouraging, he smiles wide, too wide, and she tilts her head. Not bad, not great. You wonder what twig he used. Maybe he should have gone with river reed instead of bitterroot. You head back through the winding paths of your quarter, where shadows now creep along the walls like quiet animals. You pass a small altar with a shallow bowl of fragrant herbs, clearly meant to honor a household deity. You recognize mint, thyme, and, yes, myrrh again. It seems even the divine appreciate fresh breath. Back home, you settle in with your final twig of the day. It's not fancy, just a standard branch from the neighborhood lot, stripped and sun-dried, but it's flexible, and the fibers split just right. You chew, you brush, you pause to massage your gums. A new trick someone mentioned, supposed to encourage tooth longevity. You figure it can't hurt. As you clean, your mind wanders to the earlier scene. The nervous brush, the hopeful approach, the breath-judging glance. It's comforting in a way to know that across all centuries, the little details still matter. A clean mouth isn't just about health. It's about confidence, about readiness, about showing respect to yourself, to your beloved, to the gods watching from the stars. You finish with a rinse from your barley water jug, surprisingly cool tonight, and let the liquid wash through your teeth like a sigh. You spit carefully into a corner of your courtyard, far from where your sandals sit. That lesson only needed learning once. You place your used twig beside the fire and lie back, eyes closed, mouth pleasantly numb from the clove, thoughts drifting gently. Maybe love really is in the air, but so is fennel and garlic and the faintest whisper of old onion, which is why we brush. Night falls fully now, slipping like velvet over the rooftops of Ur. The fires dim, the markets hush, and even the temple bells are quiet, as though the gods themselves are stretching out for sleep. You're lying on your mat, mouth clean, stomach full, and eyelids heavy. But there's one last ritual to observe. Not brushing this time. Tonight, it's music. You sit up slowly and reach for your old lyre, a bit battered, one string forever a half step off. But beloved, it's not just for entertainment. It's for calming the house, calling dreams, and occasionally, if you're being cheeky, playing a tooth tune. Yes, that's a thing. You pluck a few gentle notes, slow and irregular, letting them tumble softly through the courtyard. Within moments, someone next door joins in with a reed flute. It's slightly off-key, but that's part of the charm. A gentle, unspoken duet floats into the night, as ancient and familiar as the scent of baked mud. You hum quietly to yourself, recalling the lyrics to an old song your grandmother used to sing. One of the less glamorous ones, "Tooth of Mine, don't throb tonight. I brushed with twig. I prayed just right. The worm may knock, but finds no room. So sleep I shall and not meet doom." You chuckle softly. It's silly, a lullaby to fend off molar pain, but you sang it to yourself the last time you felt that strange ache deep in your jaw, and, oddly enough, it worked, or at least it comforted you until morning. Songs about teeth are surprisingly common around here. Most are humorous, some are oddly romantic. There's one lyric that goes, "Your smile was bright until the bread betrayed you." Another simply says, "I kissed her, and she tasted of cumin." Historians still argue whether these songs were genuine folk traditions or just oral distractions from the general inconvenience of dental decay. Either way, they reveal something deeply human, that even in a society obsessed with gods, floods, and barley quotas, there was always time to joke about bad breath. You strum again, 3 lazy notes, and lay the lyre beside you. The wind shifts, brushing cool across your cheek. You smell distant flowers, or maybe someone's overboiled pot of sweet herbs. The city has 1,000 fragrances, many of them clinging to walls and tunics long after their welcome. You think of the temple hymns, too, the more formal kind. Some included actual prayers for the mouth. There's one fragment, preserved on a clay tablet now broken at the edges, that reads, "Let the words from my tongue be sweet as honey. Let my breath not offend the ears of gods. Let my teeth hold firm against the bread of burden." You always like that last line. Bread of burden. It sounds poetic. It also probably refers to the government-issued rations that doubled as oral sandpaper. You recline fully now, arms folded behind your head, breathing through your nose in the slow rhythm of almost sleep. Your mouth feels clean, your breath herbal. You've brushed thoroughly, rinsed twice, and, thanks to the clove, you won't need to chew again for hours. Still, somewhere in the back of your mind, the toothworm lurks. You picture it, a tiny, resentful creature curled around the root of a molar, waiting for you to neglect your routine. He's smug, pale, a little poetic maybe, but tonight he's got nothing to chew on. You've cleaned well. You've sung his banishment. He sulks in the shadows, thwarted once again. Nearby, someone begins to snore. Another joins them, lower and raspier, like a broken reed pipe in the wind. The city is dozing. Even the animals seem more subdued. Only one stray goat bleats, and even that sounds sleepy. You consider one more verse, just for yourself, just to seal the day. The twig was sharp, the herbs were strong. I brushed with care, it took me long, but now my teeth are soothed and clean. No nightly aches, no worm unseen. You murmur it into the dark, the words melting into the warm hush of night, and then you smile. Because who would have guessed, really, that teeth, those humble little bones, would be so central to your daily rhythm, your rituals, even your songs? Not in a flashy way, not dramatic, but slow, steady, boring, comforting. The fire flickers low. The wind stirs one last time, and your jaw relaxes into stillness. No chewing, no scraping, no rinsing, just silence and peace. The next morning arrives quietly, like someone sneaking into the room, hoping not to wake the floorboards. You blink into the pale light and sit up with a stretch that cracks your spine in 4 different languages. Your tongue flicks instinctively over your teeth, gritty, a little dry, but not terrible. Still, you know the drill. It's twig time. You reach for one of your newer specimens, a thick, smooth piece from a freshly trimmed date palm. This one came highly recommended from the herbalist's cousin, who claimed the sap makes your breath smell like roasted honey. You have doubts. Still, you chew. The bristles bloom nicely, soft but springy. You begin brushing as you step outside into the cool of morning. It's still early enough that the streets are quiet, the bread ovens only beginning to exhale their smoky breath. The canals glisten, frogs hidden somewhere beneath the surface, making wet little complaints about the sun. You're headed to the plaza, where today there's supposed to be a demonstration by one of the wealthier merchants. Word is, he's imported a whole bundle of elite twigs. You smirk. Elite twigs. That's a phrase you didn't expect to hear this lifetime. You arrive just in time to see the merchant, robe pristine, sandals gleaming, and teeth that shine a little too brightly for comfort, unrolling a mat that displays a fan of carefully arranged sticks. Each is labeled, painted, and tied with colored thread. He gestures grandly. "From the north," he announces, holding up a dark reddish twig. "Fragrant, strengthens the gums burnished with silver." From the crowd, someone snorts. Probably a potter. Another twig is introduced as priest blessed, wrapped in linen and reeking faintly of myrrh and ego. The merchant explains that the cloth was soaked in temple incense water and that brushing with it not only cleanses the mouth, but absolves minor lies. Handy, if true. You glance down at your own twig, still in use. It's pale, plain, slightly frayed, humble, honest, the sandal of tooth tools. You don't trade it in. Instead, you watch the spectacle. The crowd murmurs, inspecting the luxury wares. A woman asks if one comes in a flavored version. A young man insists that the silver-burnished stick scratched his tongue. The merchant assures everyone that discomfort is a sign it's working. Historians still argue whether elite oral hygiene tools were more effective or simply expensive. Some evidence suggests high-born Mesopotamians used foreign woods, even imported pastes mixed with crushed gems. Others think it was mostly performative, a way to show wealth and refinement, while secretly envying the simpler local twigs that didn't cost a goat's ransom. You quietly walk away, chewing contentedly. You pass a boy scrubbing his front teeth with what looks like a split reed he probably picked up off the ground. His form isn't bad. You offer a pointer. He nods, chewing harder. Near the bakery, the smell of roasting flour hits you like a warm, grainy hug. You grab a small loaf. This one's softer than usual, maybe from better sifted flour. Still, you chew cautiously. Old habits die hard, and chipped enamel lives forever. You pass a woman selling bundles of twigs sorted by class. Peasant, artisan, scribe, and priest. You chuckle. Same plant, different price. She winks at you. You pick one from the artisan pile just out of curiosity. It's rough, slightly curved, and smells like peppery bark. Could be promising. Back at home, you inspect your growing collection. Today's artisan twig, yesterday's luxury clove branch, the trustworthy river reed, and of course, your oldest standby, a twig worn smooth at the handle and still hanging in there. You think about starting a ranking system. Texture, taste, gum friendliness. Then you think, maybe I've officially become the kind of person who reviews twigs. And oddly enough, you're okay with that. You sit down in your shaded corner, light filtering through palm fronds, and begin your midday brush with the artisan twig. It's coarser than expected, like brushing with a cinnamon stick that holds grudges, but it gets the job done. You finish with a rinse from your herbal-infused jar and a satisfied smack of the lips. A neighbor walks past and asks, "Still using peasant twigs?" You grin. "Only the best." He lifts his chin. "I bought the priest's blessed kind. It made my mouth go numb." You pause. In a good way. He hesitates. "I think the worm is sleeping." Fair enough. As the day stretches on, you trade twigs with a friend in the weaver's lane. One from his fig tree in exchange for a fennel sprig you've been soaking for 2 days. You both try the new ones like sommeliers tasting ancient wood. His makes his breath smell vaguely like soup. Yours tastes like licorice with trust issues. You spend the rest of the afternoon comparing notes. Twigs are serious business now. Back in your courtyard that night, you brush with your most reliable reed. Nothing fancy, just the right blend of softness and resolve. You take your time. Each stroke feels like a ritual of memory now, a quiet thank you to the generations of mouths that came before you, the kings and farmers, the priests and potters, all gnawing and brushing, praying and spitting, You rinse one final time and lie back beneath the stars, twigs neatly arranged beside your mat. Elite, artisan, peasant, you smile. In the end, a clean mouth is the great equalizer. The moon tonight is a lazy crescent, drooping low over the rooftops like it's eavesdropping on the last gossip of the day. You're sitting in your usual courtyard nook, brushing slowly with a fresh reed twig, the kind that squeaks a little when the fibers are too dry. You chew it down to softness and let your thoughts wander. You've brushed so many times this week that you're starting to feel like a one-person temple ritual. And yet, even after all this repetition, there's still one lingering question that won't go away. Why do we do this at all? Sure, the twig makes your breath less offensive. It scrubs away the grit from barley porridge and keeps the toothworm shivering in the dark. But when you think about it, really think about it, there's something deeper happening, something between faith and friction. You glance up at the stars. Somewhere out there, your ancestors are either nodding in approval or laughing into their celestial pomegranates. You've heard the debates your whole life. Brush or pray? Which protects the mouth better? On one hand, you have the practical camp, the healers, the traders, the women at the herb stalls who swear by salt paste and river mud. Their motto? Scrape it out or lose it. On the other side, the devout, the priests and temple scribes who insist that tooth pain is a sign of moral failure, that a clean soul will lead to clean teeth. No worm dares bite the righteous. It's an old argument, older than the bricks your city's built on. Historians still argue whether the brushing rituals evolved from spiritual purification ceremonies or were simply a reaction to the reality of chewing stone-speckled bread for 30 years. What's certain is that the line between prayer and hygiene is blurry, like looking into a puddle after a goat's walked through it. You remember your great-uncle, a temple attendant, who never brushed a day in his life but recited 6 cleansing hymns before every meal. His breath could dissolve a reed mat, but his teeth stayed put until the day he died. Coincidence? Maybe. Miracle? Possibly. Genetics? No one knows. You continue brushing, letting the movement quiet your mind. Around you, the city is hushed. Someone in a distant house is chanting, a slow, steady rhythm that sounds almost like a brushing cadence. Maybe it's a bedtime hymn. Maybe it's a plea for the toothworm to stay in its lane. Earlier today, a healer visited the market square and performed a live tooth purging. You watched from a safe distance as she held a flaming reed over a pot of bitter herbs, waved the smoke into a man's mouth and shouted, "Leave, foul worm!" He coughed, a lot, then claimed to feel better. You weren't so sure. Still, the believers gathered around her, nodding in awe, some pressing tokens into her palm, others offering to trade dried apricots for a blessing. One woman whispered, "She smoked the pain right out of my jaw." Another added, "She's got a connection with the molar spirits." You sip your barley water and consider this. Molar spirits. Imagine them. Tiny gods perched on each tooth, whispering either protection or decay. Maybe every time you forget to brush, they chip away at your enamel in protest. You brush a little longer just in case. There's a growing movement now among younger folk, those who've traveled east to the big cities and returned with exotic herbs and ideas. They talk about balance, of combining prayer and practice, of brushing while reciting blessings, of embedding rituals into the motions of everyday life. One of them, a rather intense fellow who makes soap from sheep tallow and volcanic ash, told you last week, the worm is a metaphor for time. Brush to resist it. You nodded, then asked if the soap was edible. He said no. You politely declined further enlightenment. You think about time now, about how many days you've ended with a twig in your hand and that quiet, satisfying scrape against your teeth. Maybe it's not about science or magic. Maybe it's just about care, about tending to something that can't fix itself. A small rebellion against rot. Tonight, you've added a sprinkle of powdered bay leaf to your brush, just for the aroma. It tingles slightly, and your tongue flicks along your teeth, testing each edge like a tongue-shaped inspector general. Satisfied, you lean back and gaze up at the stars. The moon's dipped a little lower. Someone's cat yowls in the distance. A reed curtain flutters, half hiding a pair of lovers sharing whispered words. You can't hear them, but you imagine they both brushed. You set your twig down carefully beside your mat, placing it parallel to your sandal like you were taught. Order in the small things reflects order in the body. You close your eyes and murmur a final line from your family's oldest tooth prayer, "Clean be the gate through which my words flow." You breathe through your nose, no stinging gums, no ache in the jaw. The worm has gone to bed. Disappointed, you smile. You wake to a strange sound, something between a sigh and a splash. Turns out it's just your neighbor dumping out their morning rinse water a bit too enthusiastically. The splash arcs over the courtyard wall and lands alarmingly close to your sandals. You make a mental note. Sandals inside from now on. You sit up, tongue poking around your mouth like a cautious guest at a questionable banquet, a little dry, a little fuzzy, time to brush. You reach into your pouch and pull out one of your favorites, a dark, lightly striped twig from a trade with a shepherd who swore his sheep chewed on the same plant to keep their breath fresh. You're not sure if that's a folk tale or just marketing, but either way, it's a good stick. You chew it gently, letting the bristles soften as the sun peeks over the wall. The rest of the city is already stirring. The baker's oven has begun its daily huff, the potter's wheel squeaks to life, and somewhere a rooster sounds like it deeply regrets whatever deal it made to become a rooster. You start brushing. You've grown comfortable with the rhythm now. Each tooth gets its turn. Each corner of your mouth has its own personality. The front teeth, confident. The back molars, moody and prone to holding grudges, especially when you've been eating sticky fruit. As you brush, you notice how many others have joined you in this quiet morning ritual. The woman across the alley is leaning out of her window, twig dangling from her lip like a sleepy detective. 2 children pass by, each with a half-gnawed stick, laughing with their mouths full of bristles. One waves their twig like a sword. The other duels back with theirs. It's a strange kind of community, built not from ceremony or celebration, but from shared repetitive care. Everyone brushes, everyone spits, everyone has a moment first thing in the morning to reclaim their mouth from the indignities of yesterday's stew. You rinse with a splash of river water you boiled the night before. You don't trust the canal straight up anymore, not since you watched a very unapologetic goat wade directly into the family drinking bucket. Back inside, you lay out your brushing kit on a flat stone. 3 twigs, new, seasoned, and nearly done, a pouch of crushed fennel, a pinch of salt, and your backup chewing clove for emergencies. You feel prepared, battle-ready even. A cousin stops by mid-morning, chewing thoughtfully on what looks like a fragment of tree bark. "Where'd you get that?" you ask. "Found it near the old flood wall. Tastes like firewood." "Sounds about right." He pulls a battered clay tablet from his satchel. "You ever seen this?" he asks, laying it down. The cuneiform is dense and erratic, like someone inscribed it mid-toothache. You squint, trying to decipher it. Something about 7 herbs and spitting toward the east. Apparently, it's a guide to a ceremonial mouth purification. You both laugh. "Imagine having to face the sunrise every time you spit," he says. "You'd have to rearrange your whole house." Still, part of you is curious. You try it. Brush, chew, rinse, and then spit delicately toward the east. It arcs beautifully, lands in a bush. Satisfying. "Think the gods noticed?" your cousin asks. "Let's assume yes," you say, nodding solemnly. Later in the day, a caravan from the east arrives. You hear the bells before you see the donkeys, low, tinny jingles that announce spice, fabric, and rumor. One of the traders lays out a series of wax-sealed pots. You wander over. "Teeth paint," he says, offering a lid for you to sniff. You do. It smells like roasted herbs and ambition. It makes your teeth shine like polished barley. You're skeptical, but you try a little. The mixture is grainy, slightly oily, and tastes like basil having an identity crisis. You brush gently, watching your reflection in a shallow bowl of water. Your teeth do look a bit shinier. You're not sure it's better, just glossier. Historians still argue whether cosmetic dental efforts in Mesopotamia were practical or performative. Some suggest it was a status symbol, white, bright teeth as a mark of leisure and resources. Others believe it was more spiritual, part of ritual cleansing before offerings or festivals. Either way, you spit again toward the east, just for good measure, and make a note to maybe not buy the teeth paint again unless you want your mouth to smell like a confused garden. As twilight draws in, you gather with neighbors near the courtyard fountain. The topic of the night? Tooth dreams. Someone claims they dreamed their molars crumbled like dried beans. Another says they had a vision of their tongue falling out, only to be replaced by a very smug twig. Everyone laughs. Then someone asks the question, "If you dream you lose a tooth, does it mean someone's cursed you?" Everyone falls silent for a beat. "You just forgot to brush," someone mutters, and the conversation moves on. You finish your last brush of the day under the stars, slowly, each tooth like a friend you're saying goodnight to. Your mouth feels light, your breath warm with fennel, and your jaw pleasantly sore. You lay your twig beside the others, a tiny soldier resting from a day's battle. The wind stirs, the stars blink, and you, clean-mouthed and satisfied, close your eyes. The sky today is brushed with a light film of dust, the kind that filters the sun into a soft gold haze and makes everything feel wrapped in old parchment. You're already awake before the first market call, sitting with your knees tucked under your robe, gazing out across the rooftops. You don't feel rushed. There's something about today, maybe the air, maybe the mood of the birds, that feels slow, still, and final in its own quiet way. You reach for your twig, not because your teeth demand it, but because your hands do. It's habit now, memory carved into muscle. You select the last in your bundle, a particularly slender branch from a desert shrub you picked up weeks ago, brittle at the base, but with an earthy, peppery scent that reminds you of evening fires and sun-warmed stones. You chew the end slowly, patiently. Each fiber breaks apart with ease, a familiar unfurling. You soften it between your teeth until it's pliable enough to begin brushing. The motion comes naturally now. You don't think about angles or pressure, you just do it. Like lighting a lamp or tying a sash or breathing. And as you brush, you let your mind wander. You think about every tooth that stayed with you, every gum that held its line. You think of the countless sticks you've used, the twigs passed from hand to hand, the powders and pastes, the stories told with mouths full of bark and hope. Your jaw moves in time with the wind in the palms above you. Somewhere, a goat bleats, a lazy, half-hearted cry. You smile. The goat is part of the ritual now, too. You walk through the familiar alleyways, twig still in your mouth. The baker waves you over with a fresh round of soft bread. Less grit today, he promises. You still chew cautiously, but he's right. It's gentle on the molars, almost fluffy. You brush again after, of course, not because you have to, but because it feels unfinished otherwise. A meal without a brush is like a prayer left unsaid. Near the shrine, a priest's assistant stands with a bundle of reeds. He hands one to a child who's just lost their first tooth, the gap in their smile wide and proud. The reed is tiny, thin, almost too flexible, but perfect for a new brusher. The child beams. It's a rite of passage. You pass by the temple fountain where the walls are carved with sacred lines, some about birth, some about the stars, and one about the mouth. A clean mouth speaks truth. A quiet tongue brings peace. A whole tooth honors the gods. You trace it with your eyes. You've seen it 100 times. It still makes you pause. Back at your home, you rinse with the last of the anise water. It tastes like memory now. Sweet, familiar, faintly bitter. You lay out your twigs. Today's spent one, worn to softness. Yesterday's, still usable if you're feeling sentimental. The one from your cousin's tree, chewed down to a stub, but still fragrant. You stack them gently, one atop the other, and set them beside the hearth. Then you sit in silence, hands resting in your lap, breath moving slow and deep. You think of all the people who came before you, grandmothers whispering over steaming clay pots, children brushing under fig trees, merchants rubbing twigs against their gums before meetings with city scribes. You picture kings and farmers, widows and weavers, each with a stick and a mouth and a hope that their teeth would last just a little longer. And now here you are. The sun sets, low and rich across the baked walls of Ur. A final breeze rolls through the city, carrying with it the scent of evening herbs, old clay, and something else. Clean wood, maybe, or the last hint of someone's breath after a good brush. You lie back. Let your mouth fall open slightly. No pain, no pulsing in the jaw, no regrets. Your breath is warm, clean, edged with fennel and thyme. You close your eyes. Sleep welcomes you. And now, as the stars rise gently over the rooftops of ancient Ur, your thoughts begin to slow, like clay cooling in a potter's hand. You're warm, safe, clean. Your breathing matches the rhythm of the wind outside, slow and even, like the hush of reeds swaying by the canal. The taste of fennel still lingers faintly on your tongue, not sharp now, just soft and earthy, like the last note of a lullaby. Imagine the city around you settling into sleep. Doors creak closed. Sandals are tucked neatly under mats. Twigs, brushed and spent, are laid to rest beside fire pits or bundled near herb jars, their duty done. The temple bells will not ring again until dawn, and even the toothworm, stubborn as he is, has curled up somewhere in your imagination to nap. Every scrape of the twig, every rinse, every whispered prayer or muttered curse at a chipped molar, they're behind you now. You've done enough. You've kept the ritual, honored the small things. You've tended the gate through which your words pass, even if tonight you no longer need to speak. Just rest. Let the warmth of your blanket cradle you. Let your jaw relax. Let your thoughts drift into soft, harmless dreams. Perhaps a reed boat on the Tigris, or a fig tree blooming in the sun, or a twig freshly peeled and smelling of the forest. Nothing loud, nothing sharp, just quiet stories and sleepy smiles. You are clean. You are whole. You are home.